There are people who kill out of habit, and the scariest part is that some do it while smiling. You know that strange feeling when many people agree on something clearly absurd, but no one objects? The truth is that, more than wanting to be right, humans have a deep need to belong, even if it costs ethics, empathy, or someone's life. The story we will explore today is one of the most impactful ever written, not by monsters or supernatural creatures, but because it exposes the darkest and most real side of human group behavior. Shirley Jackson didn't need to invent a dystopian universe. She simply chose a common village with ordinary people, living an apparently peaceful routine until the day of the lottery arrives. But we're not talking about cash prizes. In this story, the prize is death. And the most disturbing part, no one is shocked by it. Published in 1948 in the New Yorker magazine, The Lottery narrates the life of a small rural community in the United States that, every year, performs a seemingly harmless ritual, a lottery. Families gather in the square, the children play, conversations flow, and the atmosphere is of a community event, almost like a local festival or fair. But at the end of the drawing, the chosen name is condemned to be stoned to death by their own neighbors, and no one questions it. Not even the victim, who protests but submits. Beneath this simple narrative lies a powerful critique, the strength of tradition, social conformity, and the incredible human capacity to trivialize violence, as long as it is accepted by the group. And the question remains, why does no one refuse to participate? How does horror become routine when lived collectively? And, more importantly, today, with all our access to information, technology, and discourse on social awareness, have we really stopped throwing stones? In this video, we will analyze the story The Lottery in 5 parts, exploring the different layers of this unsettling work. And we won't limit ourselves to fiction. We will talk about history, psychology, culture, and of course, the present day. Because what disturbs the most about this story is not what happens in it. It's what it reveals about us. Intelligent people can make stupid decisions when in a group, and the opposite is also true. Collectivity sometimes dulls the mind. Psychologist Gustave Le Bon, in The Psychology of Crowds, wrote that within a mass, the individual loses their awareness and starts to act driven by the collective unconscious. In other words, we stop thinking for ourselves and begin thinking like the group, which doesn't always mean thinking better. In The Lottery, Shirley Jackson didn't need to justify the violence with hate, revenge, or passion. The violence legitimizes itself simply by being collective. The presence of everyone turns what would individually be a crime into an acceptable act. Alone, no one in that village would stone Tessie. But in a group, the stone flies easily. The power of the crowd is not in the loudest scream, but in the silence that no one dares to break. When everyone participates, the guilt dissolves. Jackson exposes this with an almost clinical coldness. No one questions the ritual. Some complain about technical details, as if they were talking about a logistical problem, never a moral dilemma. This naturalization of the absurd reflects how society behaves when the irrational becomes institutionalized. In authoritarian regimes, this is almost a rule. The other becomes a threat, and their elimination, a civic duty. Nazi Germany was a master at this. Jewish neighbors disappeared, and the most common reaction was a shrug of the shoulders. But we don't need to go that far back in time. In the 21st century, we see moral lynchings happening every day on social media. Someone makes a mistake, and a crowd rises to destroy, without context, without empathy, without reflection. It's the same stone. It has just changed shape. At its core, Jackson anticipated the idea of the banality of evil, which Hannah Arendt would describe years later when covering the trial of Adolf Eichmann, the bureaucrat behind the Nazi final solution. Eichmann was not a monster in the common sense. He was just an efficient employee who claimed to be following orders. And this is precisely the tragedy of the story. There are no caricatured villains, just a system functioning, cold, mechanical, automatic. a ritual that continues out of habit, fear of breaking tradition, and cowardice disguised as normalcy. And there is something even more disturbing. The children also participate. They gather stones, laugh, and follow the example of the adults. In this cycle, violence is not just accepted, it is taught. In this story, violence functions as a cultural inheritance, and it is at this point that the narrative unsettlingly comes closer to our own reality. Prejudice, hatred, fanaticism, they rarely come out of nowhere. They are taught, repeated, naturalized, until they become the norm. The community portrayed in the lottery is not evil by nature. It is obedient. And it is precisely this blind obedience that makes everything so disturbing. The greater danger is not in declared hatred, but in collective passivity in the face of the unacceptable. Now that we understand the social workings behind the tragedy, it's time to take a closer look at the mind of the one who throws the stone, and of the one who silently accepts to be complicit. There are those who would never raise a hand to hurt someone, but would do so without hesitation if an authority figure gave the order. History is full of such examples. Evil rarely appears as a monster. Most of the time it wears a uniform, speaks softly, appears polite, and hides behind orders, rules, and protocols. Shirley Jackson captured this with surgical precision. The horror in the lottery does not shout, it whispers. It infiltrates routine as if it were part of some ordinary bureaucratic procedure. Decades after the publication of the story, psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted an experiment that became a classic. Ordinary people, instructed by a man in a white coat, administered what they thought were fatal electric shocks to other individuals, simply because an authority told them to continue. The result was alarming. About 65% of participants obeyed, until the end, even in the face of screams and protests. Obedience spoke louder than empathy, and this behavior is not an exception. Another study, conducted at Stanford by Philip Zimbardo, divided volunteers into two groups, guards and prisoners. In just a few days, those who took on the role of guards began to act authoritatively, aggressively, even sadistically. Not because they were bad people, but because they were authorized to act that way. The human mind gives in easily when supported by a structure that legitimizes the absurd. In the lottery, no one needs to say, "Do this, it's the right thing." Still, everyone acts as if they are following an invisible command. Tradition is the authority. It doesn't shout, doesn't argue, doesn't explain. It commands through habit, through silence, and that's enough. When Tessie Hutchinson screams, "It's not fair," no one responds. Not because they disagree, but because the response no longer matters. The machinery is in motion, and in a well-oiled social machine, any attempt to question is just noise. And noise is easily drowned out. The truth is, obeying is often comfortable, thinking requires effort, disobeying requires courage. When the group already accepts it, when the rule is clear, when responsibility is diluted, following the flow seems like the most sensible choice, even if the result is brutal. Eric Fromm, in Escape from Freedom, wrote that humans have a deep impulse to flee from freedom. After all, being free also means taking responsibility for one's own actions. It's much easier to blame the rule, the system, or destiny than to bear the weight of an authentic choice. In this sense, the lottery functions as a kind of collective anesthesia. The villagers are not sadistic. They are emotionally numb, conditioned by a ritual where morality has been removed and replaced by routine. The violence is carried out not with anger, but with normality. Today, we see subtle echoes of this same mechanism. Employees who impose absurd targets, even knowing that it harms their colleagues. Police officers who follow illegal orders because it's the protocol. In schools and families, teenagers who witness abuse, bullying, injustice, and remain silent. Because it's not my problem. Shirley Jackson doesn't need to write a single line about psychology. She shows everything. The human mind, when trained to obey, is capable of justifying the unjustifiable, and still do so with conviction. But what if the greater tragedy wasn't just in obedience? What if the true poison is what is transmitted from generation to generation without anyone ever asking, why? The answer might lie in what we reverently and fearfully call tradition. Humans are capable of killing simply because they've learned that it's always been this way. This is one of the most sophisticated forms of violence, the kind that disguises itself as heritage, that hides under the most dangerous word in the language, tradition. In the lottery, tradition has no clear origin, no defined purpose, no apparent logic. No one knows exactly why it began, but everyone knows it must continue. One of the characters even comments that certain parts of the ritual have been forgotten or changed over the years. But the essential remains. This essential is stoning, ritual murder. And the most frightening part, it is sustained not despite the lack of meaning, but precisely because of it. The emptiness is filled by the fear of breaking the cycle. From an anthropological perspective, tradition once had its function. It unified tribes, transmitted knowledge, and created identity. But when it ceases to be questioned, it decays. And decayed, it becomes a symbolic prison. By portraying a community bound to a dead ritual, Jackson exposes a silent evil, blind loyalty to what is not understood. Throughout history, many cultures have maintained destructive practices simply because they inherited them. Female genital mutilation, for example, is still justified as tradition in dozens of countries. Child marriages, caste systems, public lynchings, the list is long, and the justification almost always comes with the word custom. Nietzsche, in The Genealogy of Morals, warns us that what we call morality today often originated from brutal, primitive impulses, merely camouflaged with a noble appearance. Shirley Jackson's lottery is exactly that, a murder disguised as a ceremony, a barbarity covered by smiles, rules, and folded pieces of paper. The community in the story is not disorderly. On the contrary, everyone dresses well, meets promptly, follows protocol politely. There is no visible blood on their clothes. There is blood in the idea. And that is even more dangerous because cleansing the mind is infinitely harder than washing one's hands. For centuries, slavery was legitimized by economic, social, and even religious traditions. In the United States, the Bible was used to justify the ownership of human beings. In Brazil, slavery sustained the agribusiness for almost 4 centuries. And when abolition finally arrived, the greatest resistance came from those who said, "But it's always been this way." Today, the vocabulary has changed, but the structure persists. Structural racism, cultural homophobia, misogyny transmitted as traditional education. Tradition, when it no longer serves life, begins to serve death, even if it's a symbolic, emotional, or social death. Shirley Jackson, with just a few pages, managed to deconstruct centuries of irrational attachment. She doesn't need to raise her voice, she doesn't accuse anyone, she simply holds up a mirror and forces us to look. The tradition in the lottery is not absurd, not impossible, not distant. It is close, familiar, unsettlingly familiar. And perhaps that is why so many readers reacted with anger when the story was published. Because deep down, they knew they were seeing something very real, something they may have witnessed, something they may even still defend or fear to question. When the past is used as a shield to justify the present, history ceases to be a lesson and becomes repetition. And some cycles can only be broken when someone has the courage to raise their hand and say, "This no longer makes sense." Every society at some level chooses a body to bury, a scapegoat, someone to carry the guilt, to distract from the true cause, to absorb the collective weight of evil, even if they are innocent. Behind the bucolic facade of the lottery pulses the ancient heart of a ritual we follow, often without realizing it. The choice of the victim in the lottery is not merely random. It is profoundly symbolic. Shirley Jackson did not just write a story about a village that kills someone every year. She laid bare, with disturbing precision, the mythical logic behind the sacrifice. And the most unsettling part is realizing how, even in modern societies, we continue to stage this same blood theater. Renée Girard, in Violence and the Sacred, theorized that faced with unbearable social tensions, primitive communities created an escape valve, the scapegoat. Someone was chosen, often arbitrarily, to carry the collective guilt. Diseases, crises, disagreements, everything was placed upon them. And then the sacrifice happened. Death brought catharsis. Peace was bought with blood. This is precisely the logic of the village created by Jackson. There is no plague, no war. Life continues calmly, but still someone must die, not for a crime, but for a ritual necessity, a sacrifice for maintenance. The difference lies only in appearance. Instead of masks and altars, we have urns and papers. Instead of priests, we have heads of households. And the method chosen, stoning, is not random. It is a shared violence, distributed in small doses. No one holds the knife. No one fires a shot. Everyone throws a stone. No one is entirely guilty, and precisely because of that, everyone participates. It is a brutal symbol of moral fragmentation, a body destroyed by 1,000 small concessions, a crime dissolved in consensus. The lottery wasn't written to be read and forgotten, it was made to disturb, to be a thorn in the mind, and perhaps to prevent the next square. Some stories are not born to entertain. They are born to poke, to get us out of our place. The lottery is one of those. It reminds us that danger rarely screams. It whispers. It hides in traditions, conventions, silences. And the most disturbing part, it doesn't survive by force. It survives through conformity. If this analysis touched you in any way, and if it made you think, caused discomfort, or sparked reflection, then it has done its job. This channel exists for this reason, to shine a light on what many prefer to keep under the rug, to turn literature into a beacon. And if you value this kind of content, there are ways to help that make a real difference. Becoming a channel member directly supports the production of these videos, and more than that, it's joining a community that knows the value of thinking differently, that doesn't just watch but builds. The Super Thanks feature is also a beautiful way to say, this content moved me. I want more people to see it, but honestly, just by being here, watching, commenting, sharing, you are already contributing. Every view is a spark that keeps this project alive. If you can take one more step, I'll be eternally grateful. But if all you can do now is watch to the end and share this video with someone, it's already more than enough. Because this channel is also a choice not to throw the stone, but to open the book.